thank you for agreeing to participate in this forum and for giving of your time and your family's time and all of the members of the Ordinance Task Force to public service. Before I hand the program over to this evening's moderator, I want to say a few words about the organization that's sponsoring tonight's panel discussion and also the rerun of this panel this coming Monday night in New Carlisle at its public library. The Community Forum for Economic Development is a community organization that is concerned about economic development in St. Joseph County. The group formed following an educational forum on local economic development at Item South Bend held last April. For more information about our organization, we have just a very brief information sheet in the back that has our contact information on it as well. The Community Forum is sponsoring this public meeting tonight because we believe that rural and urban development initiatives should enhance rather than harm the quality of life in St. Joseph County. In addition, we support the process the County Health Department has used to develop this particular ordinance. The creation of a citizens task force representing a range of perspectives on health effects of CAFOs allowed the development of an ordinance that combined the knowledge and experience of a wide segment from our community.
My name is Mark Nelson. I'm the Environmental Health Manager for the St. Joe County Health Department. I was tasked by the County Council to facilitate the preparation of this ordinance, the forming of a steering committee that eventually consisted of 24 members of the public that represented a wide variety of participants from the public, including CAFO operators and non-CAFO farmers and rural residents, and the technical advisory committee that consisted of department heads from the county government, including the executive director of the Area Plan Commission, the building commissioner, the assistant county attorney, the health department, Dr. Hellenthal from Notre Dame, and a professional geologist that is a consulting geologist. We used those two committees to put this ordinance together, and the health department actually did the writing. I would like to speak, just generally put CAFOs in perspective, and then I want to run through the provisions of the ordinance that we have submitted to the County Council for their action, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Hellenthal. The state is experiencing a large increase in the number of CAFOs that are coming into our state, and that's not a bad thing. They just, in our opinion, they need a certain level of controls that is not presently in place in Indiana. I think there have been nearly 175 new proposals this year for CAFOs, and there are only 500 in the state, so that is a dramatic increase in the number of CAFOs. Our state government has not given authority to address the health effects from CAFOs, or potential health effects from CAFOs, to any agency of the state government. So there is no one at the state that is tasked with the responsibility of looking at that. They have left that responsibility to the counties, and numerous counties are looking at that themselves. Indiana, as I said, has not addressed the health issues as most other states have. All of the states in the Midwest, with the exception of a couple, from Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kentucky, have all addressed this issue at the state level in some form or another. They have taken different approaches. You will hear about that in more detail later. But in Indiana, it's left up to the county, so that's why we have prepared this ordinance for the consideration by our council. The ordinance itself, there were 5 things that we used as the basic approach to developing the ordinance. The first was the requirements had to be based on scientific data and the available data. We did not have the money or the time to go out and collect data for this ordinance. Non-health issues such as odors or property values were not to be included in the ordinance, and they're not included in the ordinance. This is a public health ordinance. Requirements were to be included only when there was a technically defensible reason to do so. We did not want to include any requirements on CAFO operators when it was not necessary. They don't need the extra regulation if there isn't a technically sound reason to do so. We would place no requirements on livestock operations that are smaller than CAFOs. And for those of you who are not familiar with the threshold, it takes 1,000 steer, 1,000 heifers to make a CAFO, 700 dairy cattle, 2,500 hogs, 125,000 chickens. So it's a pretty substantial operation to meet the threshold to be a CAFO. And you have to meet that threshold to be regulated under this ordinance. The overriding consideration for the ordinance was how to protect public health. The health department would not support an ordinance that would not do that. Each time we incorporated a requirement on a CAFO, we tried to provide some other mechanism that they could use to lessen that requirement. So if they needed a certain setback from a school, let's say, of 2,000 feet, we might let them go down to 1,500 feet if they incorporated additional measures to reduce the hydrogen sulfide emissions. That's only fair. If they're willing to take those measures and those steps to reduce hydrogen sulfide emissions, then we could give them credit for that. I do want to say a little bit about data adequacy. CAFOs have been an issue for a long time. In other states, Iowa, Missouri has been struggling with them for years, as is North Carolina and other states. And those states are considerably ahead of where we are, but there isn't a tremendous volume of data that would allow us to say, from this particular CAFO, we need to have residents no closer than X number of feet. There is a major study being performed by EPA. Right now, the results will probably not be published and decisions made for maybe as much as 5 years. So there is not enough data for us to give precise answers. However, there have been some excellent studies, and there are some hard and fast points from which we can use and we can build off of and which we did build off of to make the setbacks in the ordinance. Okay, the first thing that the ordinance does is it establishes an agriculture advisory board. There was a strong feeling that the rural residents, and in particular the farmers, do not have close enough communication with the county government. And I certainly think that's true. So we have a board that will be appointed by the county council, the county commissioners, and the board of health that will be composed of CAFO operators, non-CAFO farmers, other rural residents who will meet with department heads of county divisions, county departments, along with some technical experts. Something similar to the steering committee that we have that developed this ordinance. It's an ongoing board that will provide some feedback between the two, and hopefully when we address a zoning ordinance or something of that sort, the rural community will have more input into that process. The ordinance does require a permit. The health department issue a permit to every existing and future CAFO in the county. The application for that permit includes all of the information that is now presented to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management to get their permit, as well as one other key item. Among the things that a CAFO operator has to submit right now is a farmstead plan, a stormwater prevention plan, an emergency spill response plan, a manure management plan, and a soil conservation practice plan. Those plans can be copied and submitted to the health department as part of their application. And then in addition to that, the health department wants a waste management plan, which essentially gives a list of every waste that will be generated at the CAFO, how much waste will be generated each year, how they will store it, and how they dispose of it. We think that's important of any major operation these days, but it's especially important for places that have both medical and non-medical waste and some hazardous waste on sites. We want to make sure that that material does not get into the manure and then into surface waters. Another thing that the health department can take into account when it's issuing its permit is the history of compliance of the operator with environmental laws. If they have a very poor record, that can be taken into account, and we can add additional requirements on their operation if they have a poor record of compliance. We might ask for, require extra monitoring wells or extra sampling or something like that if we felt that it was necessary to ensure compliance with the rule. The CAFOs that have been operated in the county up till now have been relatively small, except for one large operation. But the operations that you're likely to see in the future are going to be much, much bigger. Many of them are. The next, and probably one of the most controversial and important parts of the ordinance was to establish a setback that CAFOs have to maintain from residences. If a new CAFO comes in and wants to build on this plot of land, how close can the nearest residence be? The overriding concern there is the exposure of the residents to hydrogen sulfide emissions from the CAFO. CAFOs also emit a fair amount of ammonia, but that precipitates out rather rapidly, so if you take care of the hydrogen sulfide emissions, you've taken care of the ammonia. And what we ended up doing was setting two sets of standards. One, a standard setback, and one, a reduced setback. The standard setback would apply to all CAFOs. That's a setback from the residences. And a reduced setback, some CAFOs could qualify for if they were willing to perform certain measures during the design and operation of their CAFO to reduce hydrogen sulfide emissions. They could qualify for the reduced setback. The minimum reduced setback that we settled on was 800 feet from the nearest residence. That is only for small CAFOs, the size of CAFOs that you have in the county now, 5,000 hogs, for instance. And it is only for those CAFOs that would implement those technologies to reduce the hydrogen sulfide emissions, such as they would not be allowed to have any open air lagoons. If you have an open air lagoon, then you immediately qualify only for the standard setback. So for the smallest CAFO, the setback is 800 feet from the nearest residence, and the standard setback is 1,000 feet. The standard setback is always 25% higher than the reduced setback. Now, as the size of the CAFO gets larger, the size of the setback gets bigger. They go up about 300 feet for every time there is a substantial increase in the size of the setback, such that when you double the size of the CAFO, you essentially double the size of the setback. So instead of, if you go from 5,000 hogs to 10,000 hogs, you go from a setback of about 800 feet up to 1,400 feet from residences as they reduced, or from the standard setback, you would go from 1,000 up to 1,750 feet. Those setbacks it's necessary that the CAFO operations be that far from a residence so that the residences are not exposed to unsafe levels of hydrogen sulfide. And hydrogen sulfide, as Dr. Helmdahl will discuss, has a long history of analysis. We know fairly well what the concentrations need to be. The ordinance then goes on to list a whole set of residential setbacks for each size of CAFO. Now, we also have a setback from a residential zoning district. That is essentially a large unincorporated area of the county, or you can think of it as a large subdivision. Those are twice the distance of the setback from the residence. And I'm gonna show you a map here in a minute that'll hopefully explain all this a little better. And then we have setbacks from municipalities. That means our 5 towns and our 2 cities. You have to have a larger setback from those. And the reason you have to have a larger setbacks from residential zoning districts and from municipalities is because they have a higher population and they are much more likely to have a higher number of people that are highly sensitive to hydrogen sulfide. The range of people's sensitivity to hydrogen sulfide ranges quite a bit. People with asthma, children are far more sensitive to it than the average adult. Elderly people are also more sensitive to it. Okay, in addition to those setbacks, we have setbacks from certain types of facilities that we felt were in need of additional protection, and those are schools, daycare facilities, and medical facilities, including hospitals and long-term care facilities, and to some degree churches. Those types of facilities, where you have the schools and the daycares where you have children, you need a greater level of protection for those than you have for residences, because you have high concentration of children. And medical facilities, if you have people staying overnight at a medical facility, they may already have respiratory problems. You cannot add upon that a dose of hydrogen sulfide. So there's a substantial setback for those what we call sensitive receptors. And those sensitive receptor setbacks are essentially the same, are the same as the residential zoning districts. We also have some setbacks from water features, and such as wetlands, ditches, streams, public water wells, off-site wells, and on-site wells. Some of those are very similar to what IDEM currently requires, but we, as a group, decided that it was necessary to increase those distances a little bit. So we increased those, generally we increased them from 300 feet to 500 feet. But we also gave the CAFO the opportunity that if they would put in a filter strip of vegetated land between their operation and the water feature, or if they would build a berm between their lagoon and their water feature, that they could go back to the IDEM setbacks. So we have setbacks for residences, setbacks from residential zoning districts, setbacks from municipalities, setbacks from schools, hospitals, daycare facilities, churches, and setbacks from certain water features. And when you boil all that together, this is what you get. This is a map, and all of the colored area are areas that are restricted from CAFO development for one reason or another. You have, obviously, you have here, the yellow is the municipalities. The residential zoning districts are this brown shade. All of these blue circles is a 800-foot setback around every house in the county. These brown circles here are either schools or medical facilities. I think they're all schools there. The green on here are wetlands where you can't put CAFOs anyway. So for the smallest size CAFO, the 5,000 hogs, for instance, a CAFO could be located anywhere where it is white. Now, there's a lot of that land that is not suitable for various other reasons, and it's a lot of land that's owned by people that don't want CAFOs, and there's many other reasons why a CAFO cannot locate on the land. But at least from the county ordinance that we have proposed, all of the white on here would be open for development for the smallest CAFO. Now, as the size of the CAFO gets larger, each of these areas gets larger. The blue setback is a setback from each of your homes. If you live in the country, your home is on here, and it's got a blue circle around it. As the size of the CAFO gets bigger, the size of that blue dot gets bigger. You double the size of the CAFO going from 5,000 hogs to 10,000 hogs, the size of that blue circle gets twice as big. The size of the the residential zoning district gets twice as big, and the size of the setback from the hospitals and schools is twice as big. So the white area shrinks considerably and quickly as the size of the CAFO goes up. Now there is one other setback that I did not address, and that is the setback between CAFOs. Obviously, if you have a home in this corner and they decide to put a CAFO on all four sides of you, and they meet the residential zoning, they meet the residential setback and all the other setbacks, you are going to get a dose from each of those four CAFOs. And this type of map does not take that into account. So we have another set of setbacks that prevents, it establishes a distance that CAFOs must be from each other. And what it amounts to is two CAFOs don't have to be that far from each other. We double the residential setback. If you're going to have two CAFOs within 2 miles of each other, they don't have to be that far from each other because they don't give a double dose to the same residence very often. It's very intermediate, and we did calculations to come up with it. The problem comes in is when you add a third CAFO. If you can imagine a CAFO here, a CAFO here, and a CAFO here, and your home is located here, and the wind blows in that direction 40% of the time, which it does if you live northwest of a CAFO, you are going to get a dose from each of those four CAFOs every time the wind is blowing in that direction and every time there's an inversion. And you are going to get a dose above the levels that have been accepted by or established by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry as causing health effects. So we analyzed that issue. We debated it hotly. It was a difficult issue. It is a complex issue. The health department had 3 proposals on it. Dr. Hellenthal had at least 2. Other people have proposals on it. We went round and round, but we ended up with a system where 2 CAFOs can be relatively close to each other. If there's a third one within 2 miles, it has to be a pretty far distance away. We do allow that third one to reduce that setback if they will incorporate additional measures to reduce the hydrogen sulfide emissions. And that's only fair. I'll let all that sink in for just a second. Okay, there's just a few other things I want to hit, and then we'll move on. We did establish some design requirements for CAFOs. Some of them are not too dissimilar from what IDEM already requires. There are things like if you have an open lagoon, any new one would have to have a synthetic liner in it. We do require flood protection for the CAFO, confinement structure, the feed storage structure, and the manure storage structure. What we require is somewhat pretty similar to what IDEM already requires. We do have some requirements for operations. They concern keeping the site clean so that you don't have manure all over the place, spills of manure all over the place that become a source of hydrogen sulfide. If you have a spill, you have to report it to the health department. You have to properly dispose of your dead animals. There's record-keeping requirements. And then there are some requirements on the application of manure. Grandfathering. All existing operations in the Walnut Grove proposed CAFO are grandfathered in under this ordinance. The design for everything except the operational requirements. Everybody has to meet the operational requirements. The existing operators, the only design requirement that they have to meet is they have to cover their solid manure storage area. And the health department has pretty strong enforcement authority should we want to. But if somebody's a hard case, they will comply one way or the other. And that's all I have to say. That is the guts of the ordinance. There's a lot of language in there that makes it complicated, that gives exceptions and ways to get waivers and variances, but we think there's sound controls on that, and they're only granted when there's a good sound technical reason.